Good morning, friends on Zoom and YouTube. We'll begin our devotional in just a few moments. Good morning and welcome to our daily devotional from Pilgrim Congregational Church. I'm Patrick Horn. Very glad to have you join us on this Friday, April 30th, 2021. And we have been studying this week in 1 John chapter 4, one of the most important passages in the Bible on the concept of love, particularly divine love or agape. And this morning, I would like for us to take a closer look at the end of this passage. We've been studying 7 through 21. And this morning, I'd like for us to look at 19 through 21, and I'll offer a few reflections on these last verses. Beginning in verse 19, we love because he first loved us. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. So this is the end of chapter 4, and there's once again a very strong emphasis on the fact that this sort of this sort of love originates in God, that it comes to us from God first, and is a reminder too that it's a love that is not based on a quid pro quo. That is, it's a love that is present and offered to us without any conditions whatsoever. And in fact, it's a love that is offered even in the face of hate and other strong negative emotions and reactions. And in the context of these verses too, we have an emphasis on the fact that loving is clearly, this kind of love is clearly tied to our relationships with other people. And what's important here, of course, is that I mentioned in the Bible study on Tuesday night that we don't know a whole lot about the context, but there does seem to be an expression of some sort of tension with some group that is not to be trusted, or that is not that has not been treating the early church well. And it's extraordinary that the response is one of love. That is, that consistent with God's love for us, we don't return hate for hate. That the consistent message is love, that we return love for hate, which of course is one of the most incredible things about the gospel message. That is, that this part of the message that says that we love no matter what. And I'm often asked how to respond in very, very difficult situations, even moral dilemmas and such. And I know that the best response, I think, always begins with, well, we have to figure out what it means to love in this situation. What does it mean for us to love in this dilemma, in this context? And that's exactly the message of 1 John chapter 4. It reminds me of the story of the mother of Emmett Till, who was the African American young man who was killed in 1955 by two white men brutally murdered. And she was asked if she harbored any bitterness. And I don't know that I've ever read a more powerful testimony to the love of Christ than what she said. Here's what she said. It certainly would be unnatural, and her name was Mamie Mobley. She said, it certainly would be unnatural not to hate them, yet I'd have to say I'm unnatural. The Lord gave me a shield. I don't know how to describe it myself. I did not wish them dead. I did not wish them in jail. If I had to, I could take their 4 little children. They each had 2, and I could raise those children as if they were my own, and I could have loved them. I believe the Lord meant what he said and try to live according to the way I've been taught. What a powerful testimony of the kind of love that is described in 1 John chapter 4. Let's close with this word of prayer from W.E. Orchard. O God, who comest to us disguised in lowliness, to seek thy dwelling with the humble, may false expectations not deceive us, nor pride shut thee from our hearts. If thou come dressed as duty, plain, drab, and undesired, grant that we may not turn from thy commands. Often the homely figure has called in vain, and only when it passed we saw its glory, all too late. As neglected duties come now to mind, help us to go back and faithfully discharge them, lest we stand at last condemned before thee, life beyond recall, with no joy of having done thy will upon the earth to make a heaven about us. If thou come robed as truth, white, relentless, and austere, may we not fear to take thee as our guide. We've often been afraid that truth would strip us naked to the blast. We could not bear the gaze that seemed to burn into our souls. We knew not that truth would only set us free and fearless, glad to be what we were in thy sight and nothing more. Help us then to welcome all the truth, however painful and humiliating, lest when we come to gaze upon thy glory, our eyes have lost the power to see. If thou come to us as love, clothed in flame and crowned with sacrifice, may we not reject the offer of thyself for dread of fire or fear of suffering, lest we refuse that which alone can cleanse us and reject the love that leads to wider life. Let us know thy name, we pray thee, lest we be left lamed and lonely to face the light and life of the eternal world. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, and hope you have a very, very good day. Goodbye. Okay.
Patrick?
Hello.
Sorry,
Hi,
I'm
Lorraine.
calling in. So, hi. Sorry, I'm talking too soon, but I wanted to get the page of the temple.
Yeah, that's page 73 and 74.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And I think I just admitted someone. It was kind of late. I had my screen covered up there and didn't see that someone else was trying to get in. But anyway, welcome. Have Robert and Gracia Faye here with me this morning, and that I believe that's Lorraine, and I think that's Guadalupe on there, but I'm not sure. Good morning.
Guys, this is Richard.
Oh, hi, Richard. Yeah, you and Guadalupe have a 626 area code, and I can't seem to keep you straight. Good morning.
Mm-hmm.
What
did I miss?
Yeah, well, right. So I actually, for the devotional, it was the last part of our passage, which was 1 John 4, 19 through 21, and more about love. And
Okay.
I actually read the response of Mamie Mobley, who was the mother of Emmett Till, the young black man that was killed in 1955. And when she was asked about whether or not she was bitter did she have bitterness towards the two white men that brutally murdered her son? And so I read that passage. I'll read it. It's just very short. I'll read it to you. She said, it certainly would be unnatural not to hate them. Yet I'd have to say I'm unnatural. The Lord gave me a shield. I don't know how to describe it myself. I did not wish them dead. I did not wish them in jail. If I had to, I could take their 4 little children. They each had 2. And I could raise those children as if they were my own, and I could have loved them. I believe the Lord meant what he said, and I try to live according to the way I've been taught. Extraordinary example of the kind of love, I think, that's being described here in 1 John chapter 4.
Well, thank you for that incident, because I remember the killing of Emmett Till very well, and how horrified I was, not only by the murder, but by the fact that the men were acquitted when it was so obvious that they were guilty. In fact, they kidnapped Emmett out of a house full of people. So there was no question that they were the ones who were guilty. And yet they were acquitted. And I found that very hard to take, even though I wasn't connected to the case. But it was part of my introduction to racism. And needless to say, it's a pretty brutal one.
Yeah, it really is an awful, awful story. And it's extraordinary that this woman was able to respond in almost exactly the way that the New Testament teaches that love should respond. It's really an extraordinary case.
This reminds me.
Yeah. Go ahead, Richard.
A couple of thoughts is I don't remember Emmett Till that story personally, but there's so many of them.
Yeah.
Like that, Yeah. And the other thing is that this, what the woman said, reminds me of what was portrayed in that movie Gandhi.
I had the same thought. Yeah.
Which I suppose was based on something he actually said about that Hindu that came to him and told him to stop fasting, and says, I'm going to hell. And so he says, well, why do you think you're going to hell? And he says, well, because during the riot, I went and killed this little boy, not very high. And why'd you kill him? Well, because he was a Muslim. And then he says, well, I know a way out of hell. And, well, what's that? And he says, well, you have to find somebody that high and that old that doesn't have any parents and raise them as a Muslim.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's a very, very powerful story, and I agree. It's one that seems to perfectly capture the kind of love that's talked about here in 1 John 4. Yeah.
What I've read about Gandhi is that he derived a lot of his philosophy. Well, some of it was from his Hindu background, sure. But he, I read that he was corresponding with Count Tolstoy, and Tolstoy became a Christian and then started writing all these things, stories, about Jesus' philosophy and all that stuff, all that. And I've read a couple of those stories that Tolstoy wrote, and they're pretty profound.
Yeah.
And so Gandhi got a lot of it from Jesus indirectly through Tolstoy.
I think there's actually quite a lot that's in. Robert may know a good bit more about this than I do, but but it is fairly clear that Gandhi was influenced by several Christian, Christians and Christian literature. I know, for example, one of his closest friends was an Anglican priest. Then there's a well-known account, Charles. I know who you mean. Yeah, Charlie. He went by Charlie, no, actually. I can't remember the last name. Anyway, they had an extensive correspondence and relationship where they talked constantly about the theological and moral issues, and it's very clear that he had an influence on Gandhi, although Gandhi may have had more of an influence on Charles. But yeah, that's true. It's no, and of course we know too that the teachings of Gandhi were very important in Martin Luther King Jr.'s understanding of nonviolent protest, and how, and of course for Martin, for King Jr., it certainly, it was always, for him, it was always a Christian effort. This was a Christian effort. I don't know. You have something to add to that, Robert, about?
Well, I've read that Gandhi was influenced by Tolstoy, and also by the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes,
but
right.
At the same time, of course, he saw the Bhagavad Gita as main text, although he interpreted it because it's really about following your dharma, and if you're a warrior, fight a war, and that sort of thing. He interpreted this allegorically, of course, saying that nonviolent warfare is really much profounder than physical warfare, because it's equally accessible to everybody, young and old, strong and weak, male and female, and so on. And because it truly reflects and responds to the divine which is in the other as well as in oneself.
Very good.
Patrick?
Yes, Lorraine.
Patrick, can you repeat some of what Robert said? Because I couldn't hear all of it, and I couldn't.
Yeah, I will. I'll try to do so. He just mentioned that Gandhi was influenced by a correspondence he had with Tolstoy, but also because he read closely the Sermon on the Mount. But one of the most influential texts for Gandhi is the Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita, which is a story about the commitment, the kind of commitment that it takes to be a warrior. It's about that kind of commitment, but instead of taking it in a violent, literal way, Gandhi took it as an allegory and said that it was actually much more powerful if taken as an allegory for nonviolent warfare, and emphasizing that the strong and the weak and the and male and female and all of us have the power to participate in nonviolent warfare, and that that this is can be very powerful. And of course, that's how he used it for the movement in India.
Wow.
It takes a lot of courage to do that.
It is. I agree, Richard. There's an extraordinary amount of courage there, and of course, people died. So it's not as if it's not as if it took place on an ethereal plane. To say that it was nonviolent warfare doesn't mean that they did not endure a tremendous amount of violence, just as African Americans did in the United States in trying to resist the Jim Crow laws and to create an equal, and a fairer, more just society. But yeah, it takes unbelievable courage to be able to respond in this way.
Does.
And I think that's why. That's why Gandhi relied on the Bhagavad Gita because it is a good portion of the Bhagavad Gita is about this kind of courage that it takes to be a warrior, and of course Gandhi takes that and says, yes, it does, but it takes even more courage to be a warrior for nonviolence.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
Because you speak up even though you're gonna you know it's going to bring wrath upon you.
I really appreciated the movie Selma. If you haven't seen that, that was a really excellently, I think, an excellently executed film. That it didn't romanticize at all the the justice and civil rights movement in Selma. It was really well done because it communicated sort of the details of what was going on, while at the same time, giving a picture of how awful it was. And it shows that kind of courage, the courage to be able to stand up to violence without responding to violence with violence. Very extraordinary. Yeah, Grace Shafay, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that one of Martin Luther King's books is entitled "The Strength to Love," and the point it's hard to miss is that the weak person is the person who responds with violence to violence. That it takes enormous strength to love. And I'm not speaking out of experience particularly.
Yeah, no, I don't have.
Especially in the face of, people don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And these are friends, and they're giving you all kinds of looks, and you can feel it, and still saying it is really courageous.
Well, it's one of the. I don't know if it's what exactly what it is, but one of the peculiar characteristics or features of my life story have to do with the fact that I was born in and raised in the middle of all of that. So we lived in Selma and Marion and in the 60s and 70s, and so I grew up right in the middle of all of that, and it was it was a really strange sort of experience. I was only a toddler when in the middle of the 60s, so I don't remember very much there. I really became, I think, most conscious of racial disparities only in the early to mid 70s, when I when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I began to see some differences, although in our family, we just we didn't talk about it very much at all. Within the family, it was hardly ever discussed, if at all. And it was the sort of thing where you knew, for example, there were lots of African Americans living on the other side of town or the other side of the railroad tracks, and you knew they were poor, and you knew that they were not as educated as most of the whites, and you knew all these things about them, but you just kind of accepted that that's how it was. And it wasn't until much later in college, and even after college, that I really, because I went to a private religious college, and there were, I think it's fair to say that we had a handful of token African Americans, and that, I think that's changed a bit now, but but it wasn't really until after college. I lived in Fort Worth, Texas, my first year out of I was in seminary, and in Fort Worth, I joined a group of ministers that were working on civil rights issues in Fort Worth, and that was really the first that I began to get an education, and that was also when I really started learning about what it meant to keep your mouth shut, and it was it was a yeah, it was an extraordinary education for me, as because I actually began to learn things that I was never taught in school about. I was never taught about the Jim Crow laws or any of the rest. I mean, and so yeah, it's been a part of the journey of my life, is reflecting back on that, and trying to bring some redemption to that part of my life, which is a very, very sad story. And even today, of course, it's the inequities in Alabama are still very disturbing, just as they are in many places of the country. I wouldn't want to single Alabama out, but
they're more under the table now.
What's that?
To some extent. To some extent, they're more under the table.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. In fact, I've had many conversations with African American friends through the years, and most of them often say that they feel more comfortable in the South because they know where they stand. Whereas in other parts of the country, their experience has been that they were that the racism was hidden and surprising and shocking,
Yep.
and so much harder to manage and to navigate. Whereas in other in the South, and particularly, of course, you have places like Atlanta, which have very powerful African American communities, and so they're able to draw on extraordinary resources to be able to manage what is much more out in the open kind of racism. And it doesn't make it any better, but it certainly it does. I think too. I've been thinking a lot about, and there's been a lot of talk about reparations. And I heard a story on NPR. Did you guys hear the story about the Anglican church, or not Anglican, the Episcopal church in Baltimore? Did you hear about that?
Yes.
No.
Fantastic. Amazing.
You heard that story. So there was a one of the ministers of a prominent Episcopal church in Baltimore, one of the founding ministers or early ministers, was a slave owner. And there was a plaque to him, and there were a handful of African American people that attended the church. And this woman looked up at the plaque one day and saw the name, and knew from her own historical research that that man had owned her family as slaves. And she said she really had an existential crisis. She said she started saying, "What am I doing here? Why am I, why am I in this church?" And she said, "I almost just got up and walked away at that very point." And she said, but she started having a conversation with the rector, and they did more research, and they confirmed all of these things to be true, that he was a slave owner, that her family had actually been owned by this man. And so the church started working on offering reparations. And so they decided that they were going to take begin to take some of their money and to give it to organizations that
Yeah.
work on justice reform issues for African Americans. And so this past year, the church voted to give $50,000 to these groups, and they're going to continue to try to do more. Yeah. So
Yeah. Thank
it's a
goodness.
very powerful and redemptive story. The other, I think I mentioned a book that came out. Now I'm going to forget the author's name, but I remember the title of the book. It's called The Color of Law. And he just sort of goes through in a very methodical way and talks about the way that laws were used and interpreted to keep African Americans from being able to develop economically and to in the U.S. And the evidence is just overwhelming that we
It's so true.
that our country has economically suppressed this large group of people due only to their skin color and ethnicity, and it's completely unjust. So
Yes.
I will go on record as saying that I'm in favor of some form of reparations, and I hope that
Me too.
we'll figure it out. And it does make me wonder too about our own church. And so I've done some historical research on our church, and um, it's not a bad record from what I've seen so far. I haven't unearthed any really ugly pieces of history.
Well,
It's not too bad, but I don't think that means that we can't participate in some reparations at some point. So I'm on the lookout for opportunities for us to
oh,
do that. Yeah.
I want to say good because I'm really curious about something, and that is, well, the churches, there used to be one church, and it had a large Hispanic population, and they split.
Yes, I understand
And
there
that
used
one
to be a
is-
Hispanic services too.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Spanish services.
Yeah, and so what happened? What was the
that
cause of that?
Yeah, there was in fact, you may notice that picture in the hallway.
Yeah.
As you walk in the office, right there on the
With the
left.
ivy on the church
Yes,
still?
that
Yeah.
is a Spanish speaking organization.
Yeah.
That's a picture of a group that right. And so there was a very large Hispanic population that used our campus going all the way back to the 20s and 30s. And they established and built their own church in another part of Pomona. And
yes, it's a Good Shepherd or something. I visited it once, Cedric and I did, and the people were beautiful there.
Yeah. And but I think that congregation is no longer a Congregationalist. Is that right?
It probably isn't. I can't quite remember. It was years ago.
I don't think that it is, but anyway, there. So the history of Pilgrim has been pretty good. I mean, Congregationalist as a denomination, of course, are somewhat mixed, but there are the stories, that is, but there are a number of very powerful stories of abolitionists who were Congregationalists and who participated in the struggle to abolish slavery. And but I do think it would be worth our time to do some research into that. I mean, I don't think we've been around in Pomona for quite a long time, and of course it's not difficult to see the disparity in the economies between white people and Hispanics in Pomona.
Yeah.
I was going to say something if there's a time here, and it involved a couple of things, like the movie Gandhi. One of the things I remember was, I don't remember all the circumstances, but somebody asked him what he believed in, or was pressuring him. Well, was he Christian, or would he become one or something? And he said something like, "I'm on all faiths. I'm Christian. I'm Hindu. and he went on for quite a few of them. And I thought that was really.
And I forget what the final. Yeah, he said something at the very end, but I don't remember what that was. Is when you. Oh, what it was, the situation was, is there was this Hindu extremist organization, and I think that in that organization was the guy that ultimately assassinated him. But they were like saying, you're a Hindu, you need to support us and go against the Muslims. And then he did that reaction. But I forget what he said at the very end. Is when you tell me these things like that, and I didn't quite get the.
Well, one of those people in there who talked to him, who most was a dear friend, and he was the one who was absolutely for the separation of Pakistan from India. So, and he's famous. I mean, he was he might have been the quote-unquote president or leader of Pakistan for quite a while after. I can't remember
his name was Ali Jinnah. And I think he was kind of like the head of something, maybe it was called the Muslim League or something like that. But they were agitating for independence from Britain also, but he became.
And Gandhi wouldn't stop the fast, and they did that movie beautifully well, because this man who knew him real well, they were really good friends, couldn't. He was shaking his head when he walked away from talking to Gandhi, because he couldn't get that it was life or death for Gandhi that they not be a separated country, life or death that they all be one people, and he couldn't get it. And then the other thing
go ahead.
I was going to say something about. I grew up in the Northeast, and when I was in high school, there were let's see how many. This is grades 10 through 12, because we had a junior high school, and that was grades 7 through. I don't know. I guess
9.
7 through 9. Yes, exactly. And I never thought of it as prejudice. It's the way things were. There were no white people in my classes, and I don't remember any in the school. And there were 1,100 kids in that school, in the high school, and 600 in my graduating class. And I don't think there was one black kid in my graduating class. And when I went to nursing school, there was one black kid, girl, and that was it. And it never occurred to me, but in the Northeast, they're the guys with the brains. They're the guys with the hospitals. I mean, I know we have some to compete now, but Boston's a cramped, small city, and there are more hospitals and colleges in that cramped, small space than you can shake a stick at. And Ivy League schools too at that, and colleges, I should say. And the underlying it's the racism is underlying. It's sinister, and because of that, to my mind, it's far more dangerous, actually.
Yeah, when I was in high school, there was one. Let's see. I think, well, in my class anyway, there was one girl that was mulatto, and except for a couple of foreign exchange students, one from Uganda and one from some other African country, they didn't have any black people to speak of.
Yeah.
And but I remember the '60s and the civil rights struggle. I remember it vividly. We didn't have Jim Crow laws as such out here in California, but they did have something called restrictive covenants on deeds of trust of real estate.
Yeah.
And And what you could do is you could put on that deed of trust a restrictive covenant that the property is not going to go to somebody of color or somebody that's Jewish or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, that's part of what that guy covers in that book I mentioned, Color of Law. I found a couple of quotes from Gandhi, and maybe we could, from the movie that I think, as all of you say, does a pretty good job of representing Gandhi. One of the more famous quotes that I remember was, "An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind."
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
that's beautiful.
Yeah, which is a very good one. And then the one that you're referring to, where he meets there, he has his advisors are telling him not to meet with Jinnah. They're begging him. The Hindu advisors are saying, don't meet with him. And he says, "What do you want me not to do? Not to meet with Mr. Jinnah? I am a Muslim and a Hindu and a Christian and a Jew, and so are all of you." And he's speaking to the group of Hindu advisors when he says this.
Okay.
And he says, "When you wave those flags and shout, you send fear into the hearts of your brothers. That is that is not the India I want. Stop it. For God's sake, stop it."
Okay, so that's what he said. All right.
Yeah. So his Hindu advisors were telling him not to meet with Jinnah, who was the Muslim and Pakistani leader, right?
Yeah, well, he was a pretty inflexible person.
Yeah, well, he was a difficult man himself. Yes. Yeah.
Others, but nonetheless.
Yeah, and it was very interesting that was Gandhi's response. It does certainly remind me of the nature, and we're going on quite a long time today, but it does remind me of the nature of our own political situation here in the United States, where the parties have gotten to where, and I want to say especially the Republican Party has gotten to the point where you're seen as an enemy if you shake hands or hug someone in the other party. Or have
sad.
Or God forbid that you sit down and have a meeting with them. You're criticized.
It's very
for those
sad what we're doing.
Yeah, it really is.
Sad.
And it's
because
so
it's so painful.
It
You
is.
listen to these people, and you can see good. I mean, sometimes I have to just laugh at what they're proclaiming, but you can also see it's very hard to get that if you go along with some other way, everything you are is torn out from under you, just torn out from under you. You and so now you have no grounding, and you're supposed to accept that. And I was thinking, the Republicans, and I'm absolutely not for it, though I think the Democrats are as nutty, but not as nutty, but it's a step in the right direction at least. And I'm sorry, I heard Robert say something.
Oh, he just said, yeah, nutty in their own way.
Yeah, and so that makes me feel very sad, because I can understand why they'll fight tooth and nail to protect their underpinnings, to protect what makes them who they are. And as a nation, we do the same thing, actually, with the other countries, although at least we're trying to head in the right direction, I think, and or I hope. And so it's very, very sad. There's nothing left to do but to pray, because this isn't the way life should be. This is not the way life should be.
Yeah.
There, I've said it.
All
Too
right.
much division.
Too much division is right. All right. Well, thank you both very much. I appreciate your participation and your contributions this morning. I really, really enjoyed it, and I hope you have a very good weekend.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.